I have to remind myself that I am not healed through the making of music, that I have to go out in the world and live an actual life and have actual conversations and go to the root of the grief and the root of the violence and assess that.
And in that warm winter I withered, I just wanna get better. I'll be what you like.
I think the show is a result of community. I was a songwriter for so long, and the songwriting helped me develop a music community before I ever put out my first song. So, I think everything about the show is about the building blocks of being an artist, a supporter of artists prior to ever being an artist myself, So I think I need it because of my first ever tour. So I'm really grateful to make it feel like a community show as opposed to a thing that is just my own, I wanted to center my perspective, and I thought it was important that a lot of the songs and all the words, they came from the perspective of this young black Muslim boy from an inner city community, and I used the voices of my friends to help amplify my voice. So there are no verses on the record outside of my own, but using like Claire's voice and Daniel's voice and Rose's voice to just help platform my messaging, which has been so much of my life anyway. I took this story of like a boy from the hood, and I went to different cities and I lived with them there, and people kind of, they offered their beauty to it, and they allowed me to reimagine it through their ability to make music. And so a lot of those artists did that for me in real time, outside of just the music as well. The biggest fear was parting from the music initially. People taking the music and reimagining its concept and intention for themselves, that I think I'm okay with, and I'm even encouraged by that. But I think the fear for me was that I had to part from it, because I knew in parting from it that someone else was going to wear it in the way that they wanted to wear it. But there's a beauty in watching someone else take a thing you made and put it on themselves, and watch. It's almost like making a garment. You make a sweater and it's yours for so long, and then you give it to someone. You see that someone is finding warmth with the sweater. Someone is finding themselves more beautiful wearing that sweater. And although it's no longer yours, you're seeing the sweater has a different function. And I feel that way about a song, where I make it and it's in my home, but I know it has to go out in the world, and I know it can serve other people more than it can serve me. Because I think by the time the music is completed, it's already done its service to me. The greatest service the music can do is the fact that it exists at all. So the fact that I can make it, the process of making it is what's freeing me of the weight, But the moment that it's made, I know then that it'll have a greater purpose for the people that I'm giving it to,
And the day that I had you, yelling gang, gang, gang in my room, you sprayed me with perfume. Then we took the night, took a drive, and you were singing a street nigga lullaby. La 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 la, la la.
Yeah, honestly, that sounds like I'm contradicting myself, which I am. And I think a lot of what it means to be an artist is contradiction. It's like you contain multitudes, and some days it feels like the music is just you reinstating the pain and reliving it, and you're actually just kind of crystallizing it and glamorizing it in some way. But I think freeing myself of the weight and it healing me, they're two kind of completely different medicines, and I think freeing myself of the weight doesn't mean that the pain doesn't still linger. It does still linger, and it feels really deep, but I have to remind myself that I am not healed through the making of music, that I have to go out in the world and live an actual life and have actual conversations and go to the root of the grief and the root of the violence and assess that. I think a lot of times people rely so much on the making of the music that, you know, they untether themselves from ways that they can live healthy lives, and I just don't want to do that to myself. Like, I don't want to paralyze my ability to live like a kind of a healthy and effective life, you know, and just rely solely on music being like a potential healer, because it hasn't been, you know, and like unfortunately, like, you know, it's not practical to think of it that way, especially, you know, from where, you know, I grew up in like a really big hood, and I always tell people what I experienced, it's not post-trauma, you know? Like, PTSD is a thing that's already happened. Like, what I'm dealing with is an ongoing trauma. It's still happening now. You know, I'm still dealing with cases that are open right now. None of these cases are closed. None of the murders have been solved. And in that way, I can't think of the music in hindsight, and I can't think of my life in hindsight, you know? It's like there's still a thing ahead that I have to look to, and the music is not going to defend me as much as, you know, the world outside that I have to engage with will, you know? Man, some days are really difficult, you know? When I was doing the North, this is my first ever tour, and the first leg, it burned through me. The first leg burned through me. I nearly didn't complete the tour, and I remember calling my manager after the 5th show, and I said, I need you to cancel the rest of the shows. And he said, why? I said, I'm depleted. I can't continue to go on a stage and entertain people through the music. And even if I don't feel I'm entertaining them, I'm watching it trigger them in some way. You know, I went to a show, and there were girls in the front row, and they were weeping and weeping and weeping. And that weeping just reminded me of funerals that I attended, of, you know, memories that I just didn't think were going to be pulled beneath ground. You know, it's, you know, I think some of the harshest memories are the ones that reappear suddenly. And there were memories that were reappearing suddenly when I was on the stage, and I just didn't know if I had it in me to continue doing it. But the financial implications were too large to cancel the rest of the shows. And so I was actually made to continue performing, and I hated it, you know? And so I think this time around, I reimagined the team. I have a friend coming with me on tour who produced some of the music, and he produces Rosalia's records as well. And he just completed, you know, a job that he had, and he decided to come and just support me emotionally through the tour. And the tour manager that I have now is actually the sister of one of the friends that I lost, and Ali, and I sing the song every night. And so the fact that his sister is present and she's helping manage the tour, we're able to exchange space for each other. Because sometimes I felt isolated, because I'm like, here I am having to build an altar every night. And although I'm so grateful that people are setting the stage for me, and there's someone driving a tour bus, and there's someone controlling the lights and the sound, it's just so devastating to think that I have to face the people that I lost every evening. And so I think having her here, it just makes me feel like I'm kind of equalizing the playing field, which is really important for me. But yeah, man, I'm pacing myself, man. I'm really, really trying to pace myself so I don't burn out. And I think bringing people out on stage, you know, bringing out Sampha or Daniel or Rex or whoever it is, and working with Dev, it helps me delegate some of that, you know, grief. It's like they're holding it for me for a moment, and it's almost like, you know, they're guiding me through some of the shows, and I'm so grateful for that. It's not a very long run. Like, there's a reason I'm only doing 8 dates in Europe. It was supposed to be 14. You know, America was supposed to be 16 dates, and you know, we whittled it down to 9. That's just what my capacity is. And right now, it's like, it feels that's the only way for artists to grow, you know, is to go out in the road. But it's unfortunate, because it just feels that there are not so many ways to be a sustainable artist now. You know, if it's either you have like, you know, like a hyper focus in the online world, or you're touring without end and without stop. And so what about the people that want to exist in the space between? There's not much room for people like that. And so hopefully we can create new models for artists to exist and sustain themselves, you know.
I'm leaving Toronto.
Amazing. I absolutely view tenderness as a form of resistance. And I really appreciate you saying that, because I actually say that during my live show, in other words. But I talk about how, when even when I wrote Stay Alive, it was not so much about the physical life being maintained, but it was that someone's softness can be protected amidst violence or amidst an attack on their life or on their livelihood or on their comfort. They still decide to maintain that softness. And the loss of that softness and the loss of that tenderness, that is a great loss and that is a great defeat. But to maintain it, that is, I think, a revolutionary thing, and it is a radical thing, and it is a form of resistance to maintain the tenderness. And I think also it's like a revelation of gratitude as well. I think I don't want to be so flippant, because I'm so grateful. There are so many artists that can't, or people that aren't artists at all, that don't have an outlet for the pain. And I think, God has provided me so many outlets to express the thing that I am feeling, that I could put it in so many places, and people just don't have that. When I look out into the crowd sometimes, I'm looking at individuals that maybe don't feel they have the tools to kind of materialize any of their suffering. And I think it's so important that we find those tools. I talk about that also in the show, because I think it's important that people know that there is a tool for them out there, even if it's just like writing things down in their notes app, or setting up a little camera, like this kind of interview that we're doing right now, and just saying things to a camera and holding that video for themselves. It's so important that we preserve it in some way, and I do feel a lot of gratitude in that way. And I think gratitude and tenderness, there's nothing more important than it. Absolutely. I think, man, I grew up in a hood where you weren't really allowed to mourn someone after the first week. Like, I seen people be criticized because they were still in a devastation around the death of someone only 6 months after they passed, and everyone had to, be in a performance of letting go, or having let go of the person that was gone, because they didn't want to be strange to how everyone else was operating. And I think for me, the flag that I wanted to plant in the ground is the flag that you mourn the way that you need to mourn, that you grieve in the way that is fitting for your own heart and for your own life, and for the space required for you to move past it or to move with it. And when I'm building this performance, and when I have this audience, it's so unmanageably important that I make clear that people hold their own process, and they hold their own relationship with God, and they hold their own relationship with faith, and they try their best to resist any imposition, or any kind of criticism or pressure to behave or operate in the way that other people are operating in relation to their suffering, and in relation to their God, and in relation to their faith. It makes no sense to me that we have to follow models related to things that have to deal with matters of the heart. If it has to deal with matters of the heart, that has only one function, and it's the function of the person who holds that heart, And so that's what the show's about. That's what the music is about,